Hey everybody, welcome to the newest episode of Capital Combat. The name says it all. I'm Hakeem Branch.
Roger.
And today we're going to recap our last episode, which we talked about the HBO World Championship Boxing episode, which came on last Saturday, which had Adonis Stevenson defending his light heavyweight title against Tavoris Cloud, and also Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. fighting against Vera in a fight that we're totally confused about, which we'll go into later. First, Rob's going to start us off with the Cloud Stevenson fight.
Okay, so there was a lot of unexpected things in this fight that went against what Hakeem and I expected. We thought Cloud was going to be able to instill his power in the fight early and kind of make Adonis Stevenson, box, but box uncomfortably. What we didn't expect was Stevenson to come out and box beautifully, or at least beautifully for him. Adonis Stevenson works out of the world-renowned Kronk Gym in Detroit, Michigan, founded by the late Emmanuel Cesar, rest in peace. His trainers kind of instilled him utilizing movement in the ring, which is something that Tavoris Cloud had trouble with. Again, when trying to he was trying to walk his opponent down, and Adonis Stevenson, who looked to be in great shape, would not let that happen. Unfortunately for Cloud, he was trying to walk him down instead of trying to cut off the ring. Now, in doing so, Adonis Stevenson used his movement and actually a surprisingly very good jab to make Tavoris Cloud go into his power hand, which is his left hand, with Stevenson being a southpaw. And he landed beautiful counter lefts. He even had a few straight lefts and a few left uppercuts to the body of Cloud, which slowed him down and made him respect his power tremendously. I really can't say any more that just Adonis Stevenson just purely outboxed and outfought Tavoris Cloud.
Yeah, and you did mention that in the previous video. You said that his boxing ability would be able to give Cloud problems because he's had problems with boxers before. The thing that I was looking at was he hasn't been at the Kronk that long. It's only been maybe a year or two, I believe. Mm-hmm. And he started off with Emmanuel Stewart. Emmanuel Stewart got sick. He began training with Sugar Hill, who was one of his proteges. Who's a very good trainer, but I didn't think that the skills that they could instill in him would really submit well enough for him to be effective against Cloud in the long term. And it turned out that it was. And the issue that I had with it was that Stevenson did not move that well, actually. He did use a lot of movement, but he crossed his feet a lot. He looked really uncomfortable. But Cloud still couldn't do anything about it. And that's what bothered me. It was like, he's not moving comfortably. You should be able to cut the ring off and make him even more uncomfortable and maybe revert back to just throwing bombs and being, a knockout seeker. But he couldn't do it. Cloud looked stuck in mud the whole night. He was very confused. It looked like he had no game plan at all. And for him to be at that level, that's kind of sad. You know what I mean? His coaches, his whole team, Cloud himself, I don't know what they were planning, what they were thinking, but it's really a shame that they even allowed that to happen. But let's not take away from the plan that Adonis Stevenson worked to perfection. And there was one thing that I found that I really did like. Like I said, I didn't like the movement and stuff, but there was one move that he did that I really liked, and it's a move that I'm going to show you right quick that I learned the hard way when I was coming up boxing against a southpaw. And he actually took the guy who beat this lesson into me, showed me afterwards how he was able to do it, And Adonis Stevenson worked this very lesson I'm going to show you guys to perfection. All right, Rob's going to get into the conventional stance, and I'm going to get in the southpaw stance. Unfortunately, our backs are going to be turned to you. But what happens is Adonis Stevenson moved to his left, which most of the time they tell a southpaw fighter not to do, because you go into the power hand of the conventional fighter, the right hand. But what he did was he baited Cloud to throw his jab, and when he threw his jab, you throw your jab, he would duck in between it, and all right, we'll turn it this way. As you can see, when I'm turned this way, I have a straight line for his jaw. And Adonis Stevenson worked that to perfection all night. He cut Cloud over both eyes, stunned him multiple times, and that's one of the things that had Cloud confused. He was probably like, oh yeah, he's going the wrong way, I got this. And then next thing you know, bam, what happened? How did I get hit with that shot? And I'll tell you, that's the same way I felt. I was like, why is this guy hitting me? But if you're fast enough, you can dodge in between that person's jab or their lead hand shot and hit them. It works the exact same way with the conventional fighter against a southpaw. So Adonis Stevenson used that punch over and over again and ended up getting the stoppage. So that was a great tool that he implemented right there to get the stoppage. Even if his footwork isn't all the way there, he was able to use his hands and his power to once again pull out a very decisive victory. So congratulations to Adonis Stevenson. Now, we're going to talk about the conundrum that is the Chavez-Vera fight. And this whole situation is, when you hear a lot of guys talk about all the bad things that go on in the sport of boxing, this fight had every single one of them all rolled into one. I mean, first you've got Chavez coming off a drug suspension. He's been laid off for about a year, and he's totally out of shape. I mean, he had no commitment whatsoever. The fight was contracted originally at 163 pounds because Chavez Jr. was a former middleweight champion. So he was trying to work back into getting back down to middleweight. A few weeks later, they move it up to 168. They're like, okay, he's going to move up to the next weight class. That's fine. Then the week of the fight, they're saying, you know what? We don't know what weight it's going to be at. Whatever he weighs in at on Wednesday, we'll decide it from there. How do you do something like that? How can you say, you sign on a dotted line, I am committing to making this weight on this date for this fight, and that's what they're paying you for. That is one of the reasons they're paying you to do what you do. That's part of the commitment of being a fighter. You have to make weight, and it is professionalism. And that was very unprofessional. And I mean, we've seen some of the, we've heard some of the rumblings in the Chavez camp and things like that about him being undisciplined and things of that nature. And this is a big example of that. How can you change the weight that many times? But I mean, he can't be the only one that's at fault here. I mean, his promoter. How do you allow this to happen? How do you say, hey man, you signed a contract to do this, why aren't you doing it? You are potentially blowing me money. You need to get it together. But no, everyone went along with it. And they gave Bryan Vera hush money. He took it, which is bad, but I kind of understand from his point because, he's not going to get too many big paydays like he got for this fight. And then they kicked him an extra probably 5 or so figures to say, hey, just look the other way, get in the ring and fight. Who cares if he outweighs you by 30, 40 pounds and he didn't really have to train that hard and you did. Just take this extra 50 grand and just go about your business. That's kind of hard to turn down, but in the principle of the matter, he should have turned it down. Like, hey, I've been training my butt off to make the contracted weight. You need to hold up your end of the bargain and do the same thing. But, it is what it is. Take it away, Rob.
Well, let's get a little bit of information. Of course, like you said, Chavez Jr. has been on the drug suspension after his last fight,
It is not the first time.
So he had always had trouble making 160 comfortably.
Yeah.
So this was all that we already knew this was going to be difficult for him. That year off, anything could have happened. He could have ate his way up into a bigger size.
Because he's lazy.
Because he's young, he could have grew into a bigger body.
Okay, we can give him that.
Or it's just undisciplined.
That's what it is.
And the bad thing about it is that he is possibly the third biggest draw in Mexico behind Juan Manuel Marquez, who is the consummate
Professional.
and I mean, he is a legend in Mexico. And Saul Canelo Alvarez, who is being pushed by Golden Boy, and while his last fight was at 152, he did everything he could to make that weight limit.
Oh yeah. Professional.
Then we have Chavez Jr., who, let's face it, his last name carries weight.
Yeah.
Because his father is billed as the greatest boxer.
To come out of Mexico.
Exactly. So, while moving on from here, there were some changes in his camp. Right now, he is not with Freddie Roach. He was trained by his father for this fight. 2, he did not have strength and conditioning coach Alex Ariza for this fight as well. Who, if you know about Alex Ariza, gets fighters in great shape if they follow the program. And that's the problem everyone's been having with Chavez Jr., following the program. And if you don't believe me, go back into the archives, look at 24/7 when the build up to the fight with Sergio Martinez, you know what we're talking about.
I mean, that was the biggest fight of his career. And he decided to get up at 6 o'clock in the evening and eat some cereal. And his dad's like, hey, come on, let's go train. He's like, no, I'm all right, we're good. He stands up Freddie Roach. Who stands up Freddie Roach? He's one of the best trainers in the game. And he stood him up multiple times. I mean, Freddie Roach moved his camp around for Chavez Jr., even left his gym in LA to help him train, and he stands him up. Getting ready for the biggest fight of your career.
But hey, when you're Chavez, you can do that, apparently. Moving on. Now, we talked about the contracted weight going on. It was actually contracted at 160 because it was discussed at first. Bryan Vera had been training for literally 16 weeks. A standard training camp is about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the weight that you have to make. So, Vera, who actually has a very disciplined trainer, very smart trainer, they were training for 160, then 163. Had to back off. Okay, so 160, 168. Let's train for 168 now. Well, let's go to 173. That is 2 weight classes above what they were originally trying to fight at. So he was in tremendous shape. He looked in tremendous shape at the weigh-in, and he looked like he was in tremendous shape in the ring.
Yeah.
Chavez Jr., we didn't really want to make a pick for the fight until we saw the weigh-in, and he looked terrible. I mean, he came in just under 173, and he looked terrible. At this point, we thought he was going to win, but it was going to be ugly or controversial.
And it was.
And not only that, with Bryan Vera's camp, they said, okay, so if we're going to make all these concessions, you're going to give us money, we want one more thing. We're going to move this from a 12-round fight to a 10-round fight. Because at that point, it will be a greater chance that Vera would get the decision, if not knock him out.
Right.
Now moving on to the fight. Vera showed that he had the superior conditioning from the get-go. I mean, he had great activity, great just stamina. I mean, he was ready to go, and he was very excited, very energetic, and he was able to withstand some very hard shots from Chavez Jr. The thing is, you could tell that he was the smaller man, and I meant Vera showed some true grit, but he was a smaller man. He would land different combinations. He would try to push Chavez around. He was walking Chavez down and actually tiring her out by making Chavez move as much as he was, because Chavez had to, because he was taking punishment. But Chavez, when he landed that shot, it sounded like it hurt, and it did. In the middle rounds, if I'm not mistaken, it was about the 5th round.
Yeah.
He landed a 1-2 on Vera. The jab was more of a flicker jab to blind Vera's sight, and came with a long, straight right hand, which momentarily wobbled Vera, and probably set up the rest of the fight, because every single punch landed from Chavez equaled the 3 or 4 punches landed from Vera.
Yeah, and it was a pretty close fight. Most people had Vera winning because of his activity. The judges selected Chavez because his punches meant a lot more than Bryan Vera's. And it's kind of like if Rob and I were to fight, I could hit Rob with a really great 8-punch combination, and he hits me once. His 1 punch is going to equal my 8 punches. And when you have a fight like that, it's really dependent on the judge's preference on who they like. Do they like the activity and the work rate and the amount of landed punches of Bryan, in this case Bryan Vera, or do they like the accuracy and the force of the punches coming from Chavez? And when you have a fight like that, it gets really hard to score, and you get a lot of controversy like this because people change from fight to fight. Sometimes they like the activity, sometimes they like the clean punching and the forceful punching, and it changes from person to person. I think in this one, a lot of people wanted to side with Vera because of the unprofessionalism that came from the Chavez side. So they were rooting for Bryan Vera anyway. Honestly, I was too. I was like, man, I hope he knocked him out. But once I heard Chavez landing those shots, I was like, oh man, it's going to be a long night for Vera. I mean, he took some bombs. I mean, every punch Chavez landed sounded like it hurt. And Bryan Vera was, you could hear him in there taking the deep breaths and working. And it just seemed like he was fighting the uphill battle all night. And I think the closest scorecard was the most accurate. The 9 rounds to 1 and the 8 rounds to 2, those were pretty wide. And I mean, I guess if you prefer Chavez over Bryan Vera, you can see that. But a lot of those close rounds, you could have given to Vera, and they should have, because he really outworked Chavez in a lot of those rounds. And while I can see Chavez winning because of the ferocity of his shots, not by that wide of a margin. So, I mean, he showed that he has a little bit of heart, even though he's not disciplined. Like, he can bite down. He has some pretty good footwork. He just has to get the discipline down. Like, he's not going to beat the top fighters like that. They're trying to match him with Andre Ward, and Andre Ward will eat him for lunch and save some leftovers for later if that Chavez shows up. I mean, he probably won't even make the weight to begin with, so I don't think that fight's going to happen.
He definitely doesn't want anyone at light heavyweight because they have the power and the skill to put him on his ass.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see where he goes from here. He has the name, so he brings the money, which is why the networks, the promoters, everybody just lets him do what he wants to do because he brings in so much money. So we're going to see him again, and we'll probably have this happen again. So remember where you heard it first. It's going to happen again. We're going to be mad again, and nobody's going to do absolutely anything about it again because so much money is going to be made. That's all we got for you guys today. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like this video, subscribe, click the link down there, or I'm going to send Rob to your house. Peace.
This is round 1 and you've already lost. They don't seem to see that everything we've done is coming and gone. My fists are on fire, I perform till I perspire. My demons are in a rage, keep thinking that it's a game. I kick crime, hurricane, I told them I don't play, I'm liquid.
Black Street Fighter.